Hello, my name is Chuck Fall, and you are at a Green Renaissance meetup. Uh, Green Renaissance is teaming up with Oregon Greens, Green Liberty Caucus, the Center for Truth Politics, and People for Democratic Revolution to hold a series of discussions on what can make the Green Party a winning party. I am with the Green Liberty Caucus, and I will moderate this series and present a theory for a winning formula that could put the Green Party at the locus for a unity coalition that would make liberation from the plutocratic ruling class and the deep state it secretly deploys the goal of the movement. Participants uh, that are participating in our series generally agree that to make the Green Party a leader in a liberation movement and succeed, it needs to call for an egalitarian society that has eliminated rule by and control of the plutocratic power elite. The goal is to build a broad movement that can remove the rich from power, enable real and not fake democracy, and advance a society that serves the people and the planet. Participants will elaborate on this proposition and highlight key themes that could elevate the Green Movement as a champion for a better society. Participants acknowledge that the plutocratic predator class use a divide and conquer strategy to control the public and keep them from uniting into a freedom coalition. How can we overcome divide and conquer by the plutocratic predator class? That's kind of the question we're exploring tonight. Our featured speaker is Howard Schweitzer with the Banking Monetary Reform Committee from the Green Party US. And following on June 26th, next Thursday, will be Emmanuel Pastrich, Center for Truth Politics. He will provide a broad vision for a political organization that serves social needs and fights for an egalitarian republic while addressing the deep rot of the billionaire class. Mark Rolifson with Oregon Greens. He will explore the importance of opposing militarism, empire building, and ending the national security surveillance state. I will represent the value and the importance of calling out state crimes and the corruption of state agencies and pose this as a possible galvanizing idea. Finally, to wrap up our series will be John Spritzler, radical egalitarian. He will explore how we can get from where we are now to where we need to go, stating a collective intention for an egalitarian society on why this is necessary. So, to you, John, to Howard Schweitzer, you're going to give us a broad brush explanation for the work you do at the Banking Monetary Reform Committee. Give us a background on the role the committee plays in the Green Party US. And then you'll explain why you believe, and there is a kind of a consensus in the group that leading with a call for monetary reform could be an important leading point, a kind of tip of the spear proposition. Howard, take it away, and then I will follow with some Q&A, and we'll open it up to the group. Howard,
Okay,
how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. And thank you, everybody. Glad to be here to talk about monetary reform. I am a monetary reform activist seeking to change the monetary system. And I have three reasons, economic reason, a political reason, and a cultural reason, right? And economically, because our economy is currently rigged by the privatized global monetary system designed to systematically make the rich richer and the poor poorer. And two, politically, because our political system is rigged by that same system to protect and advance the private owner's privilege to control the mechanism of power that rightfully belongs to the citizens of every sovereign nation. And culturally, because money is a cultural artifact that influences how people interact, what they value, and even how they define success. It is a lever that we can use to change the culture. And, I understand the frustration out there in the world with the economy. There's a lot, people don't know what to do about it, but, and everybody's struggling. Not everybody, but a lot of people are struggling. And, 80% of the population pays interest. 10% of the population collects interest. So that's one of the things that's built into the system. It's all systematic, transferring wealth to the wealthy. And it's the number one issue in every election cycle. If you take a good poll and and because the system is constantly extracting money out of the poor and out of the middle class, out of 80% of the population, basically. And in fact, if you could let me share screen, I have a slide I'd like to show people,
Go
or a
ahead.
couple slides. And okay, here's my share. I have to make my screen big to get the share. Yeah. All right, the slide. Whoops.
Try
Must
it
have hit
again.
the wrong button.
No, well, you were sharing screen. We saw a PowerPoint
Oh, you
presentation.
did? Oh, okay,
Yep.
good.
Let's go back and try it again.
Yeah, I think that's all I need to do right here. Just leave it alone.
Economics of greed.
Yes, this is the wealth distribution. This is a graph. And you see this hockey stick? There's the hockey stick for you. And this is actually much taller. This is 80% of the population here. This is the wealth distribution. 80% of the population is struggling financially. Over 60% could not cover a $400 emergency. And that credit, which is what we use for money in the system, the banks create the money as a loan, and that is how our money is created and issued into the economy. And that when credit is used for money, it concentrates wealth systematically in multiple ways. One is that it's all interest bearing debt. And so interest gets built up in everything we buy, everything that's made, and all the services as well. And so consequently, you have a percentage of the price of everything is interest, and it's compounded interest. And so, because, each step along the way was using money from the production to extraction to process of materials and manufacture of materials to retailing, wholesale, that all of that is operating on borrowed money because that's the only way money is created. So that interest is built into the price of everything. And on an average across all sectors, it's 50% of our of the prices we pay for everything. So this is the actual U.S. wealth distribution. And this is the one that Americans think we have, but according to this poll. These are polls that was done by I guess it was Wealth Inequality America. Some group, that did the research here and provided this graph. And this was from their poll, how Americans think our economy distribution is. And this is how it actually is. And this is how Americans thought the ideal economy would be. And this is, you see, there's really no poor people. They're all doing pretty good. And it reminded me of a speech that Abraham Lincoln gave one time after the greenbacks were issued and things were thriving along. He was saying, wow, he says, even the poor people are happy because there's hope. And, and they're able to take care of their needs. And so anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting set of graphs. I have one more graph or a few more graphs in here I would show. I've got a bunch of text, but we'll stay away from that. And I mentioned periodic failures because the system, when you have a credit system like this, it crashes every so often on a cycle. Now it's blamed on business. They call it the business cycle, but it's actually a monetary cycle. And how that works is that when money is created, it's a loan. When money is paid off, that money is destroyed. Think of it, it's the numbers going up in the computer, and as you pay off your loan, it comes back down. Now that's all the principal of the loan. Interest here gets paid to the bank. That's all profit. But you have this system going, money created, money destroyed. Well, that's what this is a graph of. Money is created, then they stop creating it, and it crashes. And down here, where the circle is, there's a wealth transfer, because there's a bunch of loan defaults, and the real wealth collateral that was used to secure the loan is then able to be picked up by people with money for pennies on the dollar. So businesses, farms, homes, whatever. And so this is a cycle that happens every so often. There's the pump and the dump, the pump and the dump, and they get richer with and not only richer, it centralizes power, because what happens is a whole bunch of businesses go out of business. They're consumed by bigger businesses. Banks go out of business, and they're subsumed by the bigger banks. So this whole thing works towards helping monopolies grow by destroying the smaller businesses, which, by the way, provide 2 out of 3 of the jobs created in the country. So destroy the small business like the pandemic did, destroy all the small businesses, and you're going to have a lot of unemployment, right? Homelessness, etc. We talk about debt. The government debt is like 36 trillion. So that's somewhere in here. Actually in here, 36 trillion. Not too right in here.
Mm-hmm.
This is all business and household debt, up over 100 trillion. All that debt needs to be paid, not just the government debt. Everybody, and but you can't pay a debt with a debt. You have to keep rolling over, so there's no, and that's why the world is now 300 trillion in debt. There's been all this debt created, but nothing has been created to pay it off.
Hey,
It's a
Howard,
system. Yeah.
may I invite you to go into full viewing screen, a full screen view, I think, for your presentation, and the slides will become more prominent on what we see on the screen.
Oh.
Do you know about this?
Go up to make it a slideshow.
Yeah, just go into your
So
slideshow mode.
yeah, like that. Gotcha.
Yeah, keep going. This is I see that you do have quite an extensive lecture but keep
Yeah.
explaining. Um,
Okay.
this is
So
what,
anyway, we've got all this debt and no way to pay debt, because they don't create money as an asset. They create it as a debt. Now, greenbacks in Lincoln's time, those were assets that the government created and issued. And the economy went on a cash economy, and debt pretty much disappeared. People didn't need to borrow money. They had money. And it was
so
circulating.
Howard, explain that. How is it that as a consequence of Abraham Lincoln issuing what was the greenback, which is the
Yeah.
United States Congress during
Right.
the Civil War, created the quote greenback,
Yeah.
made the money supply, and how did that obviate debt? That's a hard one for me to understand.
Well, if money is created as a debt, you can't hardly pay off a debt with a debt, right? I mean, you can, but you're robbing somebody to do it. Basically, the system is. So, and what happens is on those cycles, back to the cycles, wherever they were. Oh, the next one up. These cycles happen when loan payments exceed loans being made. Suddenly, there's not enough money, and so the system crashes. Now, the bank can just stop lending and make that happen. And I suspect they do because they can.
So Howard, just to interject, my understanding is that the money supply for the United States in the lead up to the Civil War was was created in, I mean, maybe you should distinguish the role of the Treasury and the function of private banking organizations to issue the money supply.
Yeah, before the Civil War, banks were issuing their own bank notes. And largely that was the money people were using. And of course, there was plenty of fraud and graft in them. And if you look at, you see in this graph here, these gray lines, these
Yep.
are when the recessions and depressions happened. And they're this regular thing that happens. And if you go further back, before the 20s, and back in the late 1800s, when money was issued by banks and based on gold, the depressions were these gray lines were very wide and happened a lot. It was kind of reversed. There were thin white lines amidst a gray field. So very little out of a depression and very little prosperity happening. In the 50s, the tax burden was on the, the wealthy and
Mhm.
corporations. So um, there was not a lot of debt added to the debt. There was a much better situation going on there for 30 years, from 1940 through the war, and then the 50s afterwards into the 60s. And then we got taken off of the gold index and exited Bretton Woods, the global agreement on the money. And I think we've had a neoliberal crime fest ever since, robbing the system. And I was thinking, monetary reform in terms of making it a party thing was that how to spread the word, because it's what controls our public policy. That's the slides here that I just whipped by somewhere in here. Yeah, these slides here. This is the Princeton study. Are you all familiar with the Princeton study?
Explain it.
It was a study done about political influence of who has it, where does it come from,
Mhm.
and what they found over a 10-year spending of on lobbying, 6 industries, finance being the largest, finance sitting on the boards of all of these corporations as well, because they control them all, because they're just profit centers for them, the financiers, which are, at the top of that hockey stick. And so anyway, for 10 years, uh, you know, and actually this is 10-year, the study was 10 years, but this is just a 5-year study right here, I think is in 5 years, they spent $5.8 billion on lobbying. and they got back 4 trillion in subsidies and
So
support.
how does the spending by corporations, 5.8 billion to influence government, and the and they got a return on their investment? How would a monetary reform program, as you're advancing, change that?
Ah, okay. Well, there would be government would be issuing the money for public purpose. There wouldn't be any of this going on. I mean, this would be taking care of their own business. They would have to use government created money on everything that they did, and they would have to, these things are going to shrink, I believe, in a public money system because the greenbacks paid off debt, and that allowed small businesses to become robust, and whole economies, whole street filled with people, a good economy. And so let's see, how do you want to explain how what was your question exactly?
Well, you just demonstrated that the plutocracy can spend 5 billion in lobbying,
Right.
and they can
That's
get
how
a
our public policy gets created. And that's why the public has statistically zero influence on the system, because the system is run by money and we don't control the money. But the Constitution says we should. And so the Constitution says the Congress creates all the money. And they do it to fulfill the mandate, which is the first sentence of the preamble, which was to establish this country and fix everything up, take care of the welfare, the general welfare of the people. And of course, that's was pretty much ignored from the very beginning because Hamilton handed the monetary authority over to a private bank, and been run by private banks ever since. And it was on thought he was doing it on the Bank of England model. He was really doing it with the Bank of England. And so we've been hooked up there ever since. London is a big influence on Washington.
So Howard, just to interject again, so you're representing that though the Constitution has a feature that says Congress shall
Yes,
make the money supply for them.
Congress creates the money, and let's see, it's Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5. Congress have the
Why has
power to create the money and establish the value thereof.
why did Congress not do that?
Because
You're
Hamilton
representing that Congress never did it, and in fact, Hamilton introduced an alternative way for the money supply to be put.
Hamilton
Or
was convinced that, and of course, it was a power struggle between Hamilton and Jefferson, right? Hamilton wanted debt money to create an industrial powerhouse like England. So that's what and he spoke eloquently about it, and everybody got dollar signs in their eyes, and he won the conversation because what Jefferson was proposing was publicly issued money and a more agrarian kind of an economy. And rather than becoming a big industrial powerhouse.
Oh, my alarm clock.
But of course, industrial powerhouses tend to want to take over everybody. So there you go. You pretty much had to.
They like war too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's how they do it, right? In fact, that's what capitalism is. Capitalism is a system of financing war debt. It comes from a French word, capitalisme, or something like that. That's a system of war debt. It comes from the Middle Ages. And so we've been, and that's how they also took control of monarchies, took control of the governments of Europe, and then eventually took over England when the Dutch funded the glorious revolution of William of Orange, went over there and became king. And he, you know, it really wasn't any fighting to it because the people were all ready to throw the Catholic king out and welcome the Protestant in. So they had, and years before, they had laid the groundwork, sending Bibles over to England for people to read. So they got this whole thing whipped up. And 4 years after he became king, he handed the monetary authority over to the people who funded the Glorious Revolution, the lords and wealthy people from Europe and the area. And they all colluded and created the Bank of England, and they were given the monetary authority 4 years after he became king.
Okay,
And
so
so,
what's your, so Howard, to interject again, you're representing that we, the people of the United States, have essentially been, um, I guess, I don't know if you could even call us clients of the banking cartels, or pawns of the banking cartels, but we've been
well, the
exploited by the
Bible would
bank.
call them slaves.
Okay, okay. So, so is obviously we're not going to get your full presentation that that we're seeing that you have.
Right.
We've truncated, if you will. Has
Yeah.
this been captured in a video already?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. In fact, I have quite a lot of material here I need to put in because we haven't gotten to the part that is the subject of this webinar, which is how do we make the Green Party a winning party?
Okay.
And so uh, I was thinking, you know, that there's reasons why monetary reform would make a good issue to push forward because it's the economy, stupid, right? and and so we could get people on board. And there's plenty of historic past movements and stuff, precedents that, you know, Occupy Wall Street. And there was the Greenback movement in the late 19th century. Ireland's banking strikes. Did you ever hear about those where the local pubs became the banks because the all the bank employees went on strike? And there wasn't any banking. So the pubs became the banks. And the people just ran it themselves, you know. It's like, and that's happened twice in Ireland. And then there was Iceland's, you know, in 2008, they arrested their bankers instead of bailing them out. And they even had a currency proposal, but it was pretty much shut down by the BIS, you know, the Bank of International Settlements. It's the head of all the central banks, and they're the same ones that made Canada quit issuing public money.
Okay. I think, I mean, we have a hand up from Janice and Richards, and let's go ahead and take her question. But let's also weave back into some of the highlights from the work you've done, Howard, on the compelling reasons why a liberation movement should be looking at the issue of money, the role of the banking cartels in the power structure. Janice, you have a question. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Howard. As usual, your work is tremendous. Um, Chuck, I think that was you who said, so I guess I would call it bribery, but what do we do about the bribery? And I would like, Howard, if you don't mind, I'd love to get a copy of this PowerPoint, and I'd like to offer an alternative on the pages of what would it look like from my point of view if we presented the movement, and let's say, you know, the Congress passes the NEED Act, Kustinich's NEED Act. Then what would it look like? And I'd like to present, you know, a fairy tale version of what that could be, if you don't mind, because that's exactly what the public is going to want to see. Okay, I get everything you're
I
saying. You're
I
right.
completely agree.
Okay, thank you. If you could just email me that, I would be more than grateful, and I'll do it as quickly as possible and run it
I
back to you. Those particular slides that show an example of if we don't have lobbying and bribery, what would it look like? And I think people
no,
might be happy to find out that we're going to get rid of the bribery because I don't think anyone quite knows what to do about it right now.
I think you touched on a key issue, Janice. It
Thanks so
is
much.
articulating that vision of what could be that we need so badly. And so anything that you could do to present that to us, that would be wonderful because
That's where my
that's
thinking
that's
is
a
right now.
key
Yeah,
element to,
that's where my thinking is right now, because I'm talking to these
yeah,
Texas counties about using the National Infrastructure Bank and not giving their money to Wall Street. So that would be the next step is, okay, let's
yeah,
say we had the NEAT Act, and people ask exactly what Chuck just asked. Okay, well then what's that going to look like? And so I'd like to offer, an option, and please, everyone, feel free to, modify it or make it better or whatever. But I think we need to start somewhere. So thank you so much.
right. Well,
Howard,
I think,
Howard,
yeah,
explain what is the NEAT Act. Dennis Kucinich introduced it. It's a piece of legislation on the shelf, ready to go. Anybody could present it. And let's unpack what Janice just offered. I mean, because you raised the issue of the plutocracy has power to lobby, and they have that power because they control money. And she's, I guess, getting concrete. So let's spend a moment on that. Go for it. Let's share this slide. What does this say, Howard?
okay, yeah, this is the NEAT Act. It was presented by Dennis Kucinich in 2011. Now, we put our monetary reform committee plank in the platform in 2008. I mean, we didn't get it approved by the national party that year because there was a big controversy over another issue in the platform, so it was not passed. But the national committee had, and that was to democratize the money, and we call it greening the dollar. And basically, it was the government issues all the money debt free as a permanently circulating asset exclusively for productive public needs like infrastructure, healthcare, education, support and security, etc., as its first use. Because obviously, once the money's in the economy, then it just circulates. And of course, that was what was so what Henry Clay was talking about when he was talking about the greenback circulating and not needing any debt. And the other part of it would be closing the Federal Reserve and transferring whatever needed functions there are to it to the U.S. Treasury under public control. And then it would abolish bank money creation so that the banks would only lend U.S. money created by the government as a permanently circulating asset. Now, there would be a transition period. And what would happen during that transition period, remember I was saying as loans are paid off, the money is destroyed. Well, what would happen was, no, that money would not be destroyed. It would be returned to the government. And it would be in a, what we were calling a fund, a circling fund. And that would be a fund that was available for lots of things. But that's where the money, as people paid off their loans and businesses paid off their loans, that money would then just go into that fund. And that fund would also help banks because there'd be a lot of smaller banks opening up, because of the ones that were put out of business, right? We want to get them opened back up. We would like to get all the farms opened back up instead of concentrated into these giant 7,000 acre farms. We'd like to see 180 acre farms, with lots of people around them, and stuff, taking care of the land, growing soil, growing food. Anyway, part of that vision there, Janice, I hope, because food is, a very basic thing to um, uh, our life. I mean, you don't get up in the morning without food. You don't have the energy to do anything. So that's where it starts, is production of food. And that's why parity pricing, there's a thing called parity pricing. I never heard of it before a few years ago, but it turns out there's an organization called the National Organization for Raw Materials. And they're all about parity pricing, which is basically just paying labor the price that it costs to produce. That it means it's fair wages for the prices of labor and capital. And so when you get that, when that happens, and that has happened, that's what was that 30-year period there, was when parity pricing was in force and there was no buildup of public or private debt. And this is proven, as Norm has all those figures and everything that were done back in the 40s, I guess, 40s and 50s, and showing that parity pricing, there had been activists earlier trying to get that implemented, because it had been implemented at one point back, I think, in the early 20s or something, in the late, I guess, for World War I, probably. But anyway, important thing to pay your farmers what it costs to produce the food, right? That makes sense. I mean, that's just common fucking sense. Anyway, so, and there's all kinds of things that we could do with a public money system, because you're only restricted by what the resources are. So if it's physically possible, you have the stuff and the labor and materials. And if it's socially desirable, I mean, it's stuff that people want, and that it's ecologically wise, that it isn't screwing things up for everybody, then it's financially feasible. You can create the money and do it. We have been sold on this austerity lie for too long. It's time to blow that out of the water, because it's absurd. We live in a world of abundance, and the only reason we're running out of things is because the overuse of them. And so anyway, there's a lot of things we could do. One I was thinking that's not on this list is reparations. We could do reparations, because we very likely got the resources to give a lot of Black people their farms. Yes, indeed. And then we talk about an egalitarian society. Now, that's another leap from this. This wouldn't get us to an egalitarian society quite. It would improve society a great deal and get us towards that. But if we wanted an egalitarian society, what we would do is put a demurrage fee on the money so that it loses value, and that it's no good as a store of value. You can't store money. You can't pile up money and use it to do something with. You would have to buy wealth as you could with the money you had, and restore the value of that money each month with a 1% tax that goes on to it. And what that does, and of course that goes back to ancient Egypt, when ostrakas were used for money. They were just pieces of clay that had the amount and the date of the grain that you brought to the granary. And so, of course, the grain decomposes over time, and you get a certain percentage of it back. And so they would bring in 10 sacks and get one back for the seed for the next year. And that money circulated and created wealth for the people, a broad-based prosperity for the people. And then that happened again in the High Middle Ages. Unbeknownst to them, the nobles were issuing money to the peasants to use. They operated between countries with gold. You know, that was the big thing, was gold. But among the people, they had a system where they were just issuing these, uh, coins, bronze coins and stuff for circulation medium. And there was a tax on it every year. And so it was operated like a demurrage currency. But that created such a prosperity in the High Middle Ages that they built 3,000 giant cathedrals. And it was little villages building them. There was a village of 50 building a cathedral that could seat 150, and they were doing it because they had their minds on the future. In a system of demurraged money, people start thinking of the future. There's other examples of it. Egypt, High Middle Ages, the Worgle money that happened during the Depression. These things are, money is a cultural artifact. It's not just a circulation medium. It's just not an economic tool. It's a cultural artifact and has an effect on people, on
Howard,
how it's created and how it's distributed. Yeah.
so Howard, I'm going to interject and make the observation that we are obviously just kind of scratching the surface here on this very rich topic. And I would like to schedule another time privately with you, and you would basically give your full lecture of your slideshow. And then we would have that as a record and we could post it and people can get your full lecture. Tonight, we're not getting the full lecture, obviously. But we have a number of hands up. People do want to pick your brain.
Great.
And I think we should go ahead and stop the sharing. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a remark about the in the chat. John Olson kind of asks, I guess it's kind of been, questioned here. If the Constitution declares that Congress shall, quote, coin money, how is it that how is it that this has never been accomplished? And if you had a remark about the 1913 Federal Reserve Act, why don't you make a remark, just kind of answer John's kind of query here. Why
Sure.
haven't we gone down this path? Although we have gone down the path, Abraham Lincoln took us down the greenbacks path, and he was.
It has been a struggle for
Yeah,
3,000 years.
Okay.
That's what the American Revolution was about, trying to get out from under the rich running the money on them. And they tried, they won militarily, but as I was explaining earlier, they lost monetarily and ended up back in the same old system. And so when the Civil War came, and of course that was an issue, a big issue in all the elections back in the day and up to the Civil War, then you had Lincoln trying to borrow money to protect the nation from, the South invading them. And the bank said, okay, 30% or 36%, some ridiculous interest rate. And he said, no. And one of his advisors said, hey, man, we could just create the money. It's in the Constitution. Let's do it. It took some courage, but they did it. And they created $450 million worth of greenbacks. Now, that's all that they created, but it was permanently circulating medium. The bankers wanted to get it out of circulation because it was doing so well amongst the people and they were getting wealthy because it just kept circulating, right? And so they wanted to get it out. So they got Congress to pass a thing that said, okay, the banks will redeem it in gold. Bring your greenbacks in, we'll give you gold. And people wouldn't do it. They understood the utility of the greenbacks and wouldn't do it. They were smart back then. The dumbasses that do it today, I'm sure. But anyway, gold. Woo. And so there you go.
Okay, thank you, Howard. So look, we have Maureen, Mark, Joe, Emmanuel, Janice. Let's go to Janice because she kind of I don't think we kind of did justice to her initial query. Janice, if you had a further question or point you wanted to make, so let's just be clear that we're working on the premise that Howard is right, that a monetary reform movement would be good for the Green Party to lead on. It has a provision in its bylaw, in its platform to do this, but it's not doing it. Jill Stein does not lead with it. None of the people running as Greens are speaking about the domination by banking cartel. So for whatever reason, they don't find this a compelling argument. And I'll make an observation that John Spritzler posted into the chat. He has a Substack post. John, as a radical egalitarian, actually subscribes to the notion that we abandon our money. So we'll have a chance. John can reflect on that when he gets his in more detail, and he can make a remark about it tonight if he wants. But let's just understand that this is, I would say that we're grappling with what I consider a tactic, and Howard just acknowledged that a monetary reform program, if we pass the Need Act, it's not a slam dunk. It's a tactic and a larger strategy of liberation from this dominator plutocratic power structure.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with this, but I think there's something here, and it's a real wonky topic. So that's, let's go around to the hands. Maureen, what is your thought? You have a question or an observation?
Oh, okay. I'm bringing it way down. Okay. In the Constitution, somebody made the quote about the Constitution, and it said they can create and generate. And I'm just wondering if those words mean credit and interest, or because coin says to me cash, whereas those
Yes,
other
that's
words
right. That's exactly what it
credit.
means. That's exactly what it means. Cash.
So
Okay.
explain
right.
that,
Okay, good.
explain that distinction, Howard. Give Maureen a fuller reply.
Well, you're right. Cash, that's the real money, really, in a sense, because most of the money is electronic. Nearly all of it is electronic. And the government prints the currency, but that's like only ever about 3% of the money that's in circulation. Most of it's electronic going on. It's just numbers and computers. And but the cash, that's the money that they can't track. That's why they want to get rid of it and do this other shit, you know. And but that's what they were talking about, was issuing cash, and that's what the greenbacks were. It was issuing cash, and and the economy could adjust to that, and then it's not under control of anybody, you
Right.
know.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of cash. Thank you.
Yeah.
Howard.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Let's keep going around. Janice, you got your hand back up? Did you want to just further elaborate on your observation and remark?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, Ellen Brown reported that it was 400 million. Howard said 450 million. We're not going to quibble over $50 million. But what happened in 1972 was that a task was given to one of the agencies of the federal government to determine what the interest would have been on that, given the current interest rates of the Rothschilds, for example. And it was 10 times that amount. It was $4 billion of interest that were saved by doing the greenback for just those few years. And if you extrapolate that number out, it's astonishing. And I just wanted to add that Jill and I graduated from Highland Park High School together in 1968, but she's not following our monetary path. So I don't know if I'll ever get to say, Jill, come on, or whatever, but I just wanted to share that little tidbit.
Well, I hope you do. I hope you do, because that's really important what you were saying.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Um,
Janice. That fun fact that you went to high school with Jill Stein. Well, maybe that's something you could reach out to her at the next high school
Right.
reunion.
Yeah, we
Right.
saw each other at the 19 national meeting. And the first thing we both said was, oh yeah, your hair was so cute. And we were 17 the last time we saw each other, but it was great fun.
I have barraged her with many emails over the years.
Okay, and she's not biting.
No, never interested, I guess,
Hey, well, that's something we can further grapple with about why that might be. Mark
Right.
Rawlinson,
Yes.
you had your hand up, please.
Yes, you're talking about debt and you're also talking about recessions. And I was thinking about the crash of 2008 and what I believe sparked that off was over the counter derivatives. So banks were selling these and buying these over counter derivatives, these bundles of credit card debt and mortgages.
Right.
And that when that all went south, when people couldn't pay their mortgage, it crashed the economy. And I guess the Bank of North Dakota, which was a public bank, state bank, didn't have the same problems as the other banks. All the other banks had to be bailed out, and if they hadn't bailed out the banks, it would have potentially crashed the entire world of economy, because the whole economy was playing with this debt, like they were going to make money off all this debt. And so anyway, just to finish, like if all of a sudden everybody can't pay off their credit cards, which are ridiculous, interest, but if they can't pay it off, that could potentially crash the economy, correct?
And that's a bad thing.
It's definitely a big
That might be a
problem
good
for a
thing.
lot of us. It's part of that that household and business debt that's going up there over and top of the federal debt by quite a lot. Federal debt's only a little over a third of the debt that we've got to deal with. But yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say about what you were talking about, but I always get off track on that.
Well, like there was back in the Clinton years, for example, like it was Brooksley Bourne, who was the head of the Futures and Commodities Exchange Commission, wanted to regulate over the counter derivatives, but the banks were so powerful, they
well,
stopped
that's
her
the
from
thing.
doing it.
The derivatives, that's all on borrowed money too, right?
Yeah,
Stop
it's all
lending and it just crumbles.
right. Well, it was all based on debt. The derivatives was based on credit card debt and mortgage debt and student loans.
So let me just
and that's an old game of theirs too. That's not a new game.
So
And
Howard,
they're still doing
They
it.
were doing that out of the Bank of Amsterdam.
Well, what I was also heard about a year ago was the banks, like I thought that after the crash 2008 that they got rid of all the derivatives, but I guess that the banks have 20 times as much derivatives of as actual cash assets.
Right.
So it could happen all over again.
Yeah.
Howard,
Yeah.
you've suggested that if the Need Act were enacted, the kinds of things that Mark is describing wouldn't be possible?
Yeah. For instance, war. War would be a very big deal because Congress would have to vote the money to go to it, and they would then not be beholden to the big military industrial contractors anymore, who would be shrinking because they depend on this massive infusions of credit all the time. Those big oil companies, all of those big corporations are depending on this constant flow of credit. And so government taking it over, it would change. So as we were seeing, it would be a big change, a huge change, a cultural change,
Well, what about
and I like to describe it as going from a fear-based system to a love-based system. because in a fear-based system, it's all about personal accumulation, right? It's
Right.
personal gain. And the whole system is built on that. And if you aren't going after personal gain, you're going to go out of business. You know, you're not going to be able to do what you want to do. And now we have these private equity firms really going after everybody doing it and gobbling up productive businesses. 80% of the money that banks lend is for speculation. It's not for anything productive.
So let me
Not
interject
producing
again.
any wealth, in other words. It's all speculation and inflating asset prices and stuff.
Okay, so this idea of democratizing the money supply, passing the Need Act, would compel Congress to be responsible for what the
And
hell is going on in
suddenly,
society, right?
Congress would have to be answerable to the people because they would have no excuse. They have the power to create the money. They're not borrowing it. They don't have to get anybody's permission. They can do it if it's physically possible, socially desirable, ecologically wise. They can do it.
Okay.
And so they would have no excuse. So this would politicize things quite a bit, as you can see, right? You know, and we get people involved back in. Wait a minute, yeah.
Okay.
And of
So
course,
let's
then you have your conservatives saying, "Oh, it's everybody's going to get everything they want. They're just going to crash the economy and create inflation." Well, the funny thing is, they're the ones that create inflation, not us. It's not a public systems never create inflation like that. Not like the private bank. That's how private banks make war on economies is with inflation, by flooding the economy with currency, devaluing it, and and that way they can cause a regime change, right? It's one of their tools.
thank you, Howard, for that clarification. Let's go to Joe and then Emmanuel and then Tom. Joseph Kopsik.
Hi, sorry if this question is like confusing or irrelevant. I'm wondering if there's a relationship between a debt-free currency and the national debt. Specifically, I'm wondering, would it be possible to institute or create a debt-free currency before we stop adding to the debt?
It would kind of, the way I see it, and the way the legislation is written, the Need Act legislation, that's already in there, and you can go read it. Just Google the Need Act, HR 2990, and that'll get you to the whole Need Act, and you can read the whole thing there. But basically, it puts Congress in power, and that puts people in power because they're answerable to us. That's one of the things that we got, and they can then afford to publicly fund our elections, not depend on, because it doesn't take that many resources to do that, so they can just take care of that without having to depend on borrowing money from and going into debt, and then they're over a barrel to their donors. They got to do what they ask, right? And so that's our system that we have right now, which is basically a war-based economy. And, we're good at building weapons. And we can change that. We can reverse that. And so instead of it being like a centrifugal system where everything is concentrated to the middle, all the wealth and power, it would be a centrifugal system where instead of centripetal, it would be centrifugal. Yeah, and it would put wealth and power broadly, distribute it broadly, instead of concentrating it as it is. But to get to egalitarian, that's one of those things where it's almost like a religious change that we need to make there, because egalitarian societies are matrifocal societies in history. I mean, I don't think there's been any egalitarian societies that weren't matrifocal, which means that their god was female. And that's what happened in the High Middle Ages too. They were all worshiping the Black Madonna, the Holy Mother, who was the mother of the universe, had birthed the universe. And so You know, their god was female, and so women advanced a great deal during that time. They had a lot more power and influence in government and everything back in those days. Run abbeys and stuff.
Okay. Thank you, Howard. Let's go to Emmanuel and then Tom. Welcome, Emmanuel.
Thank you. I was just going to say, Howard, that you had the whole cult of Maria, of the mother, during the Middle Ages too, as a woman became more central than Jesus in the religious world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus
So
was just a baby.
just a baby, right? Exactly, which is what men are. Um, so in terms of the position that I've taken or wanted to take, and I guess I would advocate in Green Liberty is that we base ourselves in the Constitution and in the law, but that we interpret it in a legitimate way in a revolutionary manner. And so it's very nice to talk about what we can do going forward, but we have to also think about all the previous criminal actions that have been taken. So, I mean, for example, uh, I would like to be able to say through Green Liberty, say this real estate in your town, I mean Boston, I'm thinking of, owned by Blackstone, has been bought with counterfeit money. And what that means is that we can go as Green Liberty and say we confiscate all this land, all this farmland, because it was purchased with fraudulent money, which was not approved. And if you take that back 100 years, this would be a significant amount of real estate and real assets in which fraudulent money has been cooked up and used to buy real things. And so you can not merely say, well, let's have an egalitarian society and some utopian future, but say, actually, these people who claim to own these things don't actually own them. It's a fraudulent process. However, there are some problems with this. Obviously, one problem is that for some reason I don't understand, multinational investment banks wouldn't really welcome this argument. But there is also another issue, which is that we are ourselves part of the problem, since the Native Americans could make that case against all of us, right? None of us own any of this. In fact, the whole concept of ownership of land, I mean, it's not that the original inhabitants of the United States of this land were idiots, right? The Europeans came and said, "We'll give you money for this land," or they said they owned the land, and the natives said, "What the hell are you talking about? How can somebody own land?" Right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, the whole concept. So I wanted to know what your feeling is in terms both strategically and ultimately ethically and constitutionally about our taking a stance that these things, whether it's farmland or your downtown areas or other things, that these multinational private equity or investment banks own, that they don't actually own them.
Well, sure, there is all of that. But from my point of view, I think education of the people is one that's important, is getting the public, creating a movement of lots and lots of people who understand this well enough to say private money is illegal, that it belongs in the power of Congress. It's like you say, like the whole money system is illegal and needs to be changed and taken back by Congress, and they need to take the responsibility for its public purpose, which is what it's supposed to be for a sovereign nation.
But you're saying it's
And
illegal starting today, or it's illegal for the last 100 years. I mean, all those crimes in the last 100 years.
I wasn't saying starting today, of course, there's been many crimes. In fact, when wasn't the wealthy ruling and when weren't they criminals? You know, how far back do you have to go for that? I don't know. I think all the way. all the way to the beginning of civilization. But I wanted to say that I just am posting a link, and it's about the miracle. Let's see if I can of Wurgel, and it's a movie, and it's in Germany, but oh, I think I misspelled Wurgel, or I misspelled miracle. But anyway, that link will take you to a movie that gives you, and it's in German, but it's been dubbed, or rather,
Subtitle.
subtitled. Yeah, it's all subtitled in English, so you can read what is going on there. But it's a very fun movie, and it's the story of Wurgel, where, and I think this is important for Greens to know because this is a local money system. And it's a local money system that was so successful. It was I consider it I've often said that it's the world's most successful currency in history, because they were only allowed 15 months before the central banks made it illegal. But in the 15 months that this little town of 4,000 was issuing its own money and using its own resources and circulating, paying everything out for public purpose, and then taxing everything back. And so it circulated constantly. And it also had a demurrage fee on it so that it constantly lost value. So nobody could hoard the money. That's what the point was so nobody could hoard the money, and it would just be continually circulating. And it circulated fast because at the end of each month, nobody wanted to be holding the hot potato, right? And have to pay another, 1%. So it really made a hot economy. And what they did, they accomplished $2.5 million worth of public works in 15 months, but they only issued $6,000 in the currency. And because of its high velocity, that's how much wealth it was able to create in just 15 months. And what they did was they extended their water lines to the whole town. And they built 400 houses for the families who were destitute, because this was 1931 in the heart of the Depression. And so, and in Europe, it was pretty bad and had been. They had 30% unemployment there. And so they reopened the factory. They had a soup kitchen that fed everybody every day, lunch, and things, was so, they called it the miracle of Wurgel, and it was in the newspapers world around. And people from, officials from France and England and everywhere were coming there to see this miracle of Wurgel, this incredibly bustling economy that had been created in this town called Wurgel, Austria. And when 300 towns in Austria wanted to do the same, the government stepped in. And they said that this was illegal, and they shut him down. They didn't put him in jail. They didn't put the mayor in jail, the guy who really instituted all of this, because he'd been reading Silvio Gesell's book. And that's where he got all these ideas. Silvio Gesell was a merchant economist. And he wrote a book called The Natural Economic Law, or something like that. And really incredible book, because what he was saying was, among other things, what he wanted to do was see the land go to, like Henry George, go to rent, where you had to pay the government for being on your land, that you weren't in debt, but you had to pay rent on it, and because it was owned by the public. And what that would do then, he would want to take all of that money that goes back to the government and use that to fund all the mothers, because they needed to be paid for the work that they did, which was vital to any society, was raising the kids.
Thank you for that, Howard. And I'll watch that movie. That sounds very interesting. Tom has his hand up, and then we'll go back to Janice. And we're obviously going over what I thought would be an hour, but this is fine. This is good. I am going to ask Mark, Emmanuel, and John to just to give us like a 1 minute advertisement for what they will be presenting in our series. So just gentlemen,
Okay.
bear that in mind. Tom um, Rodman from Wisconsin, what are you thinking?
All right, I tie myself a little bit. So yeah, Howard knows I'm in the group, and we do like thought experiments, and I'm gonna try to hit a bunch of different concepts, and just because there's people's heads must be spinning. So the Need Act would, and there's well anyhow, the Need Act would eliminate, and Howard's going to be correcting me, but I'm like a student. We'd eliminate the Fed. We'd eliminate the concept of bank money, which is money created out of thin air, which is only really backed by the Federal Reserve System and the double circulatory system. We would, under the Need Act, pay back. There'd be no haircuts. The bondholders would be made whole, and that money to pay them off would be printed as debt-free money, and it would be done in a gradual way. And then that
Yes,
money,
only as it comes due. So those bonds are sold and there's a date when they come due. Instead of rolling them over and borrowing more to pay for them, we would pay them off.
right, and we'd be paying the interest too. And then there would be and I'm sorry, I was trying to look it up. It's not a board, but it's a group of appointees who every year would make a decision. And yeah, Howard, do you want to, well,
Oh,
no,
they would
yeah,
only have the power to say, this is how much money you should make if you don't want to have a inflation or deflation. That would
oh,
be
so,
basically very
okay.
kind of a scientific body under the
So that
Treasury.
would put the brakes on
Yeah,
spending. At least it would be a guideline. And
right.
so then they would be in a position then to issue that money when Congress comes up with a budget against that.
Congress would issue the money. Well, actually, they would appropriate the money and the Treasury would issue it. But this committee,
Okay.
their only thing would be to say how much
Okay. And again,
every year.
there is no Fed. And then that then the banks that would exist would be in a position, the commercial banks, to borrow money from, am I correct, this revolving fund
Revolving
which we
fund,
have
right.
not introduced. And then there still would be taxes. It wouldn't necessarily completely
Well,
balance.
Congress would be in charge of public policy. So see, all of that stuff could be changed. And I think one of the first things we'd want to do is stop taxing working people. They're
Okay.
creating the wealth. Why should we tax them for it? We should be taxing the
Right.
people who are taking advantage of the workers.
So not
Well,
necessarily taxing income, maybe taxing wealth more.
Parasites.
yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, parasite tax.
Okay, and yeah, so there's still more concepts like, okay, one last thing.
Yeah,
So when an individual say does go to a bank to borrow for a mortgage, the money does not get created out of thin air. The bank may not have it, but then the bank would borrow at a lower interest rate from the federal government. Now, as the individual pays off the principal, unlike the current system where the bank has to take that money off the books, so that money is effectively destroyed and all they get to hold on to is the interest. In our case with the Need Act, the bank would just pass that
no, we're
money.
getting off track there.
Well, okay, but where does that money, when the individual pays off the principal, does that go
Right.
back into the revolving fund?
No, the bank would have had that amount to lend. And so they would get that amount paid back, right? So they wouldn't have to give it to the government. That was only happening during the transition where money was transitioning from debt to asset.
Oh, maybe you could explain that. So when that money gets, when you pay off the bondholders, where does then those bondholders get that money? It goes and we had talked about that earlier, that that's not perfect. And did we have a solution for that? I mean, we're still kind of creating wealth inequality by they end up with all that cash, right?
Well, that's why I keep talking about demurrage, because that would then make their money losing value and they couldn't hoard it anymore. You know, if the public money was a demurraged money that just couldn't be
Okay, and
hoarded,
then
had to be spent, and so they would be looking for productive investments
and
instead of
my last
speculative
question.
ones.
So when the individual banks pay back, now what do we call it? Do they pay back to the Treasury if they've gotten a loan from the federal government?
The
When they,
banks, if they
when,
borrowed from the federal government, yeah, they would pay
yeah,
back to the Treasury because the Treasury would be
and I guess
running it.
I'm still trying to
Right.
understand kind of the concept of this revolving fund and how that
Yeah. Well, the
fits
thing
into the
is
money supply.
getting Congress in power so that they
Mhm.
could actually do public policy without having to serve global capital's interests, you know, that they could serve the interest of the country and create public policy to do that. A lot of those problems could be solved that way, you know, by deliberation in our deliberative bodies and figure out the best solutions. Perhaps honoring science a little bit more than they do now. It's so politicized because of the money, because of the big money that's involved in it. You know, they pay for all of that system. And I was in a thing today for Massa, which was talking to a lady who was from this private insurance company called Massa that insures the ride. Basically, you know, the helicopter rides and the ambulance rides and stuff like that. It's just a ride insurance for medical, because if you get a helicopter ride, say 100 miles from where you got hurt to the hospital, that could cost you $85,000. And your insurance company don't cover it. So that's why this private company was started and insuring all that. And of course, then they make deals with air flight companies about it and everything. And so they can sell this insurance for you. And that's then not denied for the ride. But I tell you, yeah, an ambulance ride, even a short ambulance ride, can be pretty pricey. So that's
Well,
why America
Howard,
is the only country in the world that can go bankrupt because of medical bills.
okay, that medical bankruptcy, that's what you're describing.
Yeah.
Now, let's keep going to Janice and then Mark. And then I think we're gonna wrap up and we're gonna end our recording. But again, we're gonna get some advertisements from the next speakers in our series. And I'm going to try to put a bow on our conversation this evening relative to what this series is exploring, how to make the Green Party a winning Green Party. And again, what was just demonstrated from Tom picking Howard's brains is that this is not a kind of, well, I was going to say not intuitive, this issue of money, because it's so abstracted. But I think what we're doing right now is we're having a conversation. And again, I think taking on the money issue as a tactical play in the broader strategy for liberating is worthwhile. And we're going to hear from John Spritzler. I'm going to ask him to just give us a summary remark about his Substack, because he's taking the complete radical democratic anarchist perspective that we need to liberate from money itself. Okay, Mark Rollison, what is your thought? You're muted.
Thank you, Howard, for this presentation. And I want to just read one thing out of your article, which I posted in the chat. It was your Substack article, which I also posted on Oregon Green's website. Anyway, what you're talking about is basically taking the money out of the hands of private for-profit banks and putting them in the hands of democratic public institutions. So basically money that's in private oriented banks is issued as a debt bearing or the interest bearing debt, and putting that in the hands of public institutions issuing the nation's money supply as a debt free permanently circulating asset, ensuring that the first use of all new money will serve the public interest rather than private profit. Now, would this basically, one way to do this would be, it seemed like to me, would just be to go to public banking and get rid of all the for-profit private banks.
Well,
is that correct?
Banks are controlled by the monetary system. Banks. So if you don't have a monetary system where the government's, owning that bank, and like you say, it's got to be a public bank. So that's what makes public banks work, is public money. A public bank trying to borrow money and operate on debt is not going to have it's going to be struggling, just like the Bank of North Dakota does, in terms of, they've got a nice stash of stuff there to help out the state, but they don't do it. The farmers that wish that they could get some help from that bank don't get it, but the oil companies do.
Howard,
So there's,
Howard,
the problem with public banks is in the current political system, we need to change the political system, need to empower the Congress with the power to create money so that we can create public banks that are actually public banks and not serving the massive private interests.
Right.
so let me just quickly, in the interest of moving us along, there is often confusion when, the committee that you are involved in, Howard, is the Banking and Monetary Reform Committee.
Right.
So talking about money is separate from talking about banking and the institution of the holding. And I made a note in the chat that for me, democratizing the money supply is a way of creating and expanding our commons. Part of what our movement has to articulate is that we are reclaiming right to earth, to resource, and this is a democratic project. So that's how I'm thinking about it, and I might be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong. And again, let's go to Janice, and we're gonna do a go around to the future participants, the next speakers, and I'm gonna go to John Spritzler first because I have a question for him. I'm gonna pick on him a little bit. Janice, what are your thoughts?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for that comment on the commons, Chuck. My comment might relate to the commons, but I'm talking about local economics. And if you speak, I'm giving you a sales tool. If you speak the language of the current culture, you'll use GDP. Well, I hate GDP, but you can talk GDP to them, and we can double our GDP by developing local economics. And I'm hoping to help Texas be a model for that. If we expand and support local economics as, well, let's say a part of the NEAT Act or however we can get it done, you're actually doubling the gross domestic product, gross local product, gross national product ultimately. And so you're talking their numbers game, and that's all they care about. So that's a good way to bypass a lot of argument, but you're actually doing that. You're actually expanding the economy by their rules, and you're expanding it by commons and people rules. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's something that's been supported for as long as I can recall hearing about it. So it's not a new concept.
Right. And public money can close that gap between GDP and the national income.
Right. And you make,
we need
for example,
to close that gap.
If we just recorded Texas's gross product based on development of local economies, it would expand drastically, quickly, and hugely. So that's my thesis. We'll see. If we can do it, I'll get to prove that.
Yep.
Thank you, Janice, for that contribution. And I appreciate that you're here tonight and all the work you do as a frontline activist. So because what I feel is happening right now in our conversation this evening is we're we're uh, we're we're normalizing talking about money in the way we're talking about it, and we're taking it from an abstraction into something that could be made real. So because we're talking about building a movement and we need to reach people and somehow create some confidence and inspiration for really becoming active. So we need 5,000 more Janices in our country acting in their local areas. So we're going on to approaching the end of a second hour of our conversation. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to eventually share my screen and show the post. But we have a series. Next on our series is going to be Emmanuel. So let's do this. John's going to get the last word tonight, John Spritzler, but next in our conversation is Emmanuel, and I represented Emmanuel in the notice that you've written an essay on what could make the Green Party a winning party. You're the inspiration for our meetings this series, and Mark posted at the Oregon Greens website your speech, and Mark, I hope you will post into our chat that link to Emmanuel's speech. But what you're offering, in my opinion, Emmanuel, is a perspective on what Green Party movement could be. And I say Green Party movement because the Green Liberty Caucus works inside the Green Party and it works outside the Green Party. 30% of people are not affiliated with any party. People want a way out of this, what I'm calling a techno-totalitarian dystopian nightmare, if you follow the works of Catherine Austin Fitts and the anti-technocracy people and so on. So, Emmanuel, give us a word. What should we expect from you next week? Just touch on, give us a minute and a half, and I'm gonna go to Mark. Talk about Center for Truth Politics, why we're doing this series, and then we're going to pass the baton to Mark and then Emmanuel. So next week you're coming up, Emmanuel. What should we look forward to?
Right. Well, this is a tremendously important moment in American history and world history. The import of a Green Party that can win, and this series is that the Green Party could be the major party in the United States and do it quickly. As you know, Donald Trump came from nothing to winning the presidency, so it's entirely possible. However, it requires some fundamental shifts. And the most fundamental shift is for the Green Party to become independent of the Ben and Jerry class. And the Ben and Jerry class is a bunch of entitled, wealthy, upper middle class, progressive-minded people with assets in the stock market who like the Green Party as a sort of like a decoration and are not interested in winning more than 3 or 4% of the vote. And they're the dominant force. If, however, the Green Party changed its tactics and its goals, including saying that winning elections was not the most important thing, then it could quickly grow into the largest and most powerful party, and in fact, not even a party anymore, an organized movement. And so we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. I'm sort of throwing out, asking for people's input, but I'll just give a couple ideas. So first would be to produce media journalism for people. Second is to play the role that government no longer plays, to help people organize their own cooperatives and communities for healthcare, for medical treatment, for producing, whether it's clothes or furniture, for lending, for money, regional currencies, greenback. I just think how we get out of the Green Party greenback, you can have our own currency, etc. And I'll conclude, and so that's what we'll talk about. But I want to just stress for everybody that the current environment is explosive, and the United States is under such pressure, such ideological, economic, structural contradictions that it's like lava. Suddenly, changes are possible, right? Things are molten, and that is a tremendous crisis, very, very dangerous, but it does offer us tremendous opportunities if we can seize the opportunity. And the No Kings protests were precisely such. On July 4th, there's going to be another No Kings protest. The No Kings protests, and I've now talked to several people about this, they got it, 60% right, maybe 80% right, but because of the role of Indivisible, this Democratic Party private army, it refused to take on multiple important issues, and it's sort of like, no kings, but we're not going to talk about Israel. We're not going to talk about war. We're not going to talk about, banks or private equity. We're going to just talk about, Trump is a king, and we should have a Democrat. So if the Green Party can reposition itself with our help to play a leadership role, actually organize people, and take on the directive, the impetus generated by No Kings, that this could put us on the map in an enormous way. And that's what I'd like to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. Mark Rolifson, explain Oregon Greens, and in brief, what are the highlight points that you're going to share with us that could be the winning principles and points for the Greens to lead on?
Well, the Green Party has, I think, long been a anti-war party for the most part, even though I think we have people like Howie Hawkins that went along with the official narrative on, the NATO U.S. Western narrative on Ukraine, which I think is horrifying. Because I think as Greens that we have to not only be opposed war, but we have to not fall into the narrative, the Western narrative, for example, that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked, and there's several other points to make about this, like Israel attacking Iran, for example. I don't see the media in our country, other than the independent media, calling it an unprovoked invasion, which it was. Israel attacked Iran completely unprovoked, and so the narrative is what really has shaped the American mindset, and the Green Party needs to lead on the issue of debunking the narrative, partly. I mean, and giving people an alternative to war, and going back to what Howard was saying about banking. All wars are bankers' wars. Smedley Butler, who wrote the book and published in 1935, War is a Racket, died in 1940 as the most decorated Marine in U.S. history, who later opposed war, said the way to end war was get all the profit out of war. So this is a lot of what I'm going to talk about. And with the current situation, the U.S. is on the verge of possibly entering into a very catastrophic war with Iran, thanks to Donald Trump. So I think this is something that's going to be, we're going to have on our minds, and hopefully it doesn't just explode in front of our very faces, because as I see it, is possibly being a war that will end all civilization. And maybe what we'll be left with is to simply pick up the pieces, if any of us are left, and create our new egalitarian society when it's all been destroyed. Because we're at that moment right now of
Wait, stop. I know we're at that moment. I'm teasing. Okay, so this series, we need to be, I mean, the shadow on everything is exactly that, this nuclear potential. It's terrifying. It's horrible. And we need to call it out. John Olson posted Tulsi Gabbard's kind of appeal to pay attention. And so I guess what...
Well, wait a minute. I want to say one thing about that, because Tulsi Gabbard in March said that Iran is not making a nuclear weapon. Its supreme leader, is not ordered that. He banned it in 2003, a nuclear weapons program. Well, then Trump says recently that he doesn't believe her. He said he doesn't care what she said. And so rather than Tulsi coming out with the courage and the integrity to say, look, I gave you the honest assessment here. Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Now she's saying that I'm saying exactly what Donald Trump's saying. So she's completely caving in. She's a woman that has no principles, and she's absolutely disgusting. And I think that as Greens, we cannot, tolerate that kind of mindset, where it's like people cave in under the pressure. I don't know, the Israeli lobby or who she's under the pressure of, or if she's just a intelligence op.
Someone said she's actually got a history in CIA. So let's not go down a Tulsi rabbit hole right now. We are.
What if they gave a war and nobody funded it?
Okay.
Well, that's exactly what we need to do, is take the profit out of war.
Okay. Thank you, Howard.
Absolutely.
Thank you. There's the connection. This is the connection. And what we need to do in our series, Mark, is somehow convey a coherent concept for a liberation possibility. So let's go to John Olson. He's been patient with his hand up. He has something to say, and we'll keep going down our line here.
All right. Well, thank you, Chuck. Okay. First of all, on this issue, and then I'll get to a couple others, on the issue of the money, it would be very well received if Greens took this and ran with it. The people that I am in contact with on the COVID resistance here in Maine mostly come out of the Republican side, and they're keenly aware of the Federal Reserve as they're coming out of the libertarian kind of side of the Republicans, but not fully embracing that party either. And so there's a lot of awareness, much more than there used to be, that the money is fiat money, and it's not based on anything solid. So I think we could take that and popularize that Congress ought to do what the Constitution says and create the money and take it away from the bank's ability to do so. And as has been discussed tonight, there's ways that can be done. Secondly, as far as expanding the green influence, we've got to come to grips as we have among ourselves, but we haven't really taken it to the opponents in a serious way. The whole issue of CO2 being the villain, which most of us here believe it is not. We have an ecological crisis. We don't have a CO2 crisis.
I would contest that, and I'd like to state for the record that I have proposed repeatedly to have a debate on this topic, and I would be open to such a debate, and I've been refused by every single member here of having a debate on the question of whether climate change is caused by human activity.
Let me respond.
I'll debate you, John. I find it disgusting, this anti-scientific effort to force feed us this idea that climate change is a myth, because it will not hold up to scientific analysis.
Hold it right there. First of all, I didn't say that we don't. I do say that we have an ecological crisis from many sides. I don't see that CO2 is the.
Well, I will take you on that, John. Let's have a debate.
Right, we'll do it another time.
That's an agreement. We're going to do it. We're going to do it, John. You and I. We're going to debate this.
Emmanuel,
okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
We'll do it.
Okay. Well, let me continue,
go ahead, John.
So that's one issue.
You just triggered Emmanuel.
Boy. Oh boy. Well, the other one is the whole idea that somehow men can become women, as opposed to that they should have that everybody deserves the legal, humanitarian, and civil rights, which we ought to affirm. But we need to hold the line and come out firmly that this idea of transgenderism is a mythology. And the final thing is the COVID question. Now, if we take a strong lead on all of these, collectively, along with the people that we have interviewed here and on Gloria's program with Jeremy, we could build a really strong coalition. But we've got to put these out and get definitive positions on them. So that's what I was saying. And I have never rejected having discussions with Emmanuel about CO2. So, all right, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. I am absolutely going to support Emmanuel. We will dedicate a green renaissance. We went down this path, Emmanuel, so we're not going to. This is a digression point, but we will. I think we will definitely dedicate time, Emmanuel, to have a debate.
Just interject? I mean, we spent like 7 months. It's like
we spent 7. Okay,
you weren't around. I mean, we all were skeptics about this.
No. So wait. Stop.
Well, okay, let's just say this. It was about the right-wing take on CO2. Okay.
Right.
So
well,
we tried to.
The only reason I was being emotional was it sounded like John was trying to say that this is going to be one of our principles, that CO2 has no effect on the environment, that it's not caused by humans. And that I definitely do not support this as being one of the principles for green liberty. But I am open to a scientific debate.
You're putting words in my mouth, but we'll get to it another time.
So, John,
take some deep breaths. Take some deep breaths.
Emmanuel, take a deep breath. And let me just make an observation then to John. That in your communication, as you navigate this left-right ideological media zone, you conveyed to Emmanuel a point and a perspective that CO2 is a non-issue. It's a nothing burger. So we can debate that. I personally have gone agnostic, and I don't waste my time debating that. I don't go there. I go with the toxic dump that the capitalist has made the earth.
Yeah.
And I think this whole right-wing, sidetrack into CO2 is a nothing burger. And in fact, we should have 800 parts per million because plants like it. It's like almost a silly, I don't even go there. I'm not going to waste my time. And personally, Green Liberty doesn't debate transsexualism. And because in the Green Party, the Lavender Caucus has very strongly led persecutions against anybody who questions a trans woman is a woman credo. So I will eventually come out, and I think we need to speak about transhumanism as a philosophy. Transsexualism is an expression of transhumanism, and that is a legitimate thing to debate. I would argue transhumanism is against eco-wisdom, the fourth pillar of the Green Party. So we're not going to go there right now, because right now this is in the weeds, because we need to look for those winning issues. And it's going to be, I think, money supply, but I think it's also, I have an essay at the Green Liberty site that says, housing, education, and healthcare. That I think, because someone said, that 30, 40-year-olds, people who are raising families, they want to know their kids have future. So we need
but we don't want to fund it with debt.
And furthermore, and I haven't even gotten to my part of this discussion yet. So thank you, John, for your points. Okay, so Mark Roloff, so Emmanuel's next week. Mark Rollifson will come and talk about the problem that we need to lead as being an anti-military party. And we need to connect the plutocratic power structure with dividing and conquer, creating boogeyman enemy to drive a war economy. And they accomplish that because they do this terrible debt-based money supply run by the Federal Reserve. And that's Howard's point. So we're describing a coherent gestalt of critique as we go along here. And the notion is that the Green Party would lead on liberate from the banking cartels. Let's own our money. Let's not be renters. However, whatever slogans we come up with. Okay. Emmanuel's going to speak broadly about the Green movement and the possibility that the party itself could become an institution for radical change if they accepted an open mind and expanded their consciousness around how we address politics in the world and the nightmare we're in. So after Mark, I'm going to go, and I'll be very brief. I'm going to basically argue the essay that the Green Party should lead on calling out state crimes. And this is to say, we speak matter of fact. I say post-conspiracy theory. John Olson doesn't like that, but because it buys into the notion of the CIA that anybody who talks conspiracy theory is a dunderhead, which is a stupid thing to accept. I am a conspiracy theorist. I believe in good police work and detective work, and a good cop is one who can, unravel and perceive and discern the conspiracy of a crime. And so we accept that that Eisenhower warned the nation. JFK heeded the warning and was killed. The 60s was a bloodbath of power structure. It was a coup on the nation. 9/11 was a cover-up, a crime, and now we're in the COVID. We are at war by plutocracy is at war with us, and we don't know it. And so I'm at that place. This is just a fact. I'm not going to, I don't have to tell you what exactly happened. I have to tell you that they're lying to us and they've covered up these crimes. And now we are suffering, and we're tending toward a techno-totalitarian fate. And our job is to exercise democratic destiny. And if we want to have a future, then we need to grow up as humanity and find communion in liberation. Okay, I'm going to talk about that. Now,
they want to make war on Iran now.
They what?
Yeah, and they want to make war on Iran now with the same kind of lying that they did in Iraq.
And that's the whole. Well,
yes.
When Mark explains Iran now, we need to understand Iran now in the context of 9/11, because when 9/11 happened, they said, "Okay, now we're going to have forever wars." Forever wars, regime change where. This is the culmination of an intention the plutocrats put in place. Okay, we can explain this. Now I'm done. And now bookend.
Just one thing. One of the big issues, this comes back to what Howard said, is that the discussion today about war is that these bad people are waging these wars because they're cruel or racist, and leaving out the structure by which war generates, growth and consumption, which is based upon a flawed economic system, based upon flawed money. And leaving that part out of the equation leaves people stupid. They don't understand why we keep having all these wars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right.
Well, I think this war might change people's minds, and there's actually a big push in both the House and the Senate to pass bills to block Trump from using military force. Because what I will say is Iran is going to hit the Gulf states if the U.S. enters the war that have military bases, and it'll destroy their oil fields, and we'll see the price of oil go through the roof. And so this war could potentially ruin the world economy, it's not going to be like Iraq. It's not going to be a war that's going to profit the bankers in the way that they've profited in so many other wars. I think this is going to be the mother of all wars.
Mark,
and 40 trillion in debt.
We're not going to prognosticate right now. We will see what happens. I think that the war that should have changed people's minds is the Gaza war by Israel against the Palestinians. That's what should have changed people's minds. And I'm concerned we're living in a world of media. That's our big struggle is breaking through that. So let's, again, in the interest of closing our recording, and we can chat afterwards. So bookending our event is John Spritzler. And he's advanced People for a Democratic Revolution, and he's a radical egalitarian. Green Liberty accepts the prospect that humankind we could liberate from a systems of domination, and that there's nothing fated in where we are right now. That where we are right now has been the consequence of contrivance, orchestration. And I'll close with this. The big beautiful bill had a last minute provision that said states and local municipalities may not, shall not in any way
Right.
alter the federal policy around artificial intelligence.
AI, right?
AI. This is the tell of where, and are we the people asking for vast server farms of AI to be built out? I'm not. I am no
Right.
more asking for AI server farms to be built out so that the technocracy, forget about totalitarian, so that the technocracy can affect its management and control and influence in society. Then my parents asked for chemicals to be put into our food in the 50s and 60s. We don't ask for this stuff. It's brought on and imposed on us through the power structure and these powerful people that want to profit, however we want to think about this. So, John Spritzler, give us a kind of a closing. What can we look forward to hearing from you? You're going to obviously, you can touch on your take on I'm arguing the money issue is a tactical play in the broader strategy for a radical egalitarian possibility. I think where we agree is that we need to say clearly, as revolutionaries, the intention, and then engage. John Spritzler, what are your thoughts? And what do you are you comfortable participating in this, or do you feel uncomfortable? You're muted. Oh, you're muted, John. You're still muted. Oh no, John, you're still muted. Oh, is it from your phone? Darn it. What's going on?
Hello?
Yes, we hear you. Bravo.
Okay. The Green Party should champion and advocate what the vast majority of people want. Now, I've discovered what the vast majority of people want because since April, I've been standing in front of my local drugstore 3 or so days a week with a large sign that says, "Let's remove the rich from power, have real, not fake democracy, with no rich and no poor." And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Overwhelmingly positive. People taking the sticker, taking extra stickers to give to friends, people going to the website at the bottom of the sticker, pdrboston.org, and then when I see them a subsequent day telling me how much they liked it, people handing me unsolicited dollar bills, people bringing me bottles of cold water, although today it was a mango iced fizz, people bringing me an apple, a candy bar. A person today yelled across the street from where I was, "I agree with you, what you're saying." Over and over and over again, people are saying, "I'm so glad you're doing this. I agree with it." This is what overwhelmingly people want. I call it egalitarian revolution. I call people wanting it having an egalitarian revolutionary aspiration. Now, the fact is that the people who want this, who would love it, think it's impossible. They think it's impossible because they think hardly anybody else wants it. The reason they think that is that this message, this aspiration, is 100% censored in all of the mass media and alternative media.
Yeah.
It creates the impression that nobody else feels that way. And it makes people think, I better keep my mouth shut and not say I feel that way, because if I said that out loud, people would think I was crazy or maybe even dangerous. So people keep their mouths shut. And so self-censorship plus the ruling class censorship creates the hopelessness about being able to remove the rich from power. And that's the number one strategy of the rich for staying in power, is to make people feel hopeless about the possibility of removing them from power. They don't try to make people love the rich. They make people feel hopeless that you can remove the rich from power. And when people feel hopeless about doing that, they do what we see people do, which is not trying. They think that would be a futile effort. And who would support a movement if you tried to build it? That's how people think now. So people devote their personal life to adapting to the reality that the rich are in power, to try to make your life as good as you can personally, take care of personal business, and that's what people do. But when people learn that they are in fact in the vast majority in wanting to remove the rich from power, to have real, not fake democracy with no rich and no poor, everything changes. That's when people rise up with the confidence that's presently lacking. So the Green Party should do what I'm doing, which is to do things that are designed to help people discover that they are the vast majority in having this egalitarian revolutionary aspiration. That's what the Green Party should do. And if it did that, it would meet with the same kind of response that I meet. Overwhelming support. Of course, it would lose the support of big money and people who are on the side of big money. That's true. What a wonderful thing that would be. So I think we should try to get the Green Party to do that. I don't know if we can succeed or not. In the meantime, I think we should do it personally. Now, what I just told you about my experience in front of the drugstore, how do you know I'm telling the truth? How do you know I'm just not lying or grossly exaggerating it? Here's how. Do it yourself. Ask me if you want for the file for this image, or just take a 3x5 card and write the words on it yourself. Make a sign, a homemade sign. Stand in front of your local drugstore. Get some stickers made. You know, there are companies that make stickers. Get some stickers made. I hand them out. I've handed out about 1,300 stickers so far. They are wildly popular. But how do you know I'm not lying? You do it. Find out for yourself. I live in a neighborhood of Boston called Brighton. It's a middle-class, working-class town. It's about as typical of United States towns as you can get. If your town, if you do this in your town and you have a negative response, then maybe you should move out of Beverly Hills. Because if you live in a regular town, a neighborhood in a regular city or rural town, and I've done this in rural towns too, where everyone listens to conservative talk radio, same response, overwhelmingly positive. But again, None of you have done this. None of you know what the response would be. You don't know. And that's why I hear people on the Zoom calls saying, oh, John, everyone has been brainwashed into supporting the status quo. People just want to get rich so that they'll have the real power one day. They don't want to remove the rich from power. All this bullshit. People who say this don't know what they are talking about.
I've
They
believed you.
have
I've
no
believed you all along,
basis
John. I
for
believe you.
those
You've done the research.
assertions.
You've done the
And I'm
research.
saying, if you want to know the truth, do what I'm doing. Stand in front of a public place with this message, hand out some stickers, engage people, and find out for yourself. Because if you don't do that, the only way you can know what people think in general, the general public, is from the lying, censored mass media and alternative media, which is equally lying and censored because it's controlled by the same rich people. And if you don't want to know the truth, well, stay in your bubble, only talk to people who agree with you on Zoom calls, and nod your head in approval when you hear someone say, oh, the rich are all the regular people are all brainwashed into supporting the status quo. And you can live in that bubble, and the rich will see you living in that bubble, and they'll say, we've got them just exactly where we want them,
So, John,
neutralized. So I say, find out for yourself, and let's get the Green Party to do the same thing.
okay, thank you, John Spritzler. And John Olson, you made a remark. What was your remark?
Okay, it was just that we agree. I mean, I've agreed all along. John, you've done the research. You've proven the point, as far as I'm concerned, and I think people on this call would also agree. That's the case. So but we don't have to do the same thing because it's duplicating, what you've already done, and we thank you for it. You've done a great job.
I'll tell you though, John, there's a difference between agreeing with me and knowing from personal experience in your bones that it's true. There's a big difference. And what we need, if we're going to build a movement to remove the rich from power, is we need people having the kind of confidence in their neighbors that comes from personal experience in talking to them and hearing them agree with the egalitarian revolutionary aspiration. Until you have that experience, it really doesn't amount to very much.
Thank you, John. So let me just observe, and we are going to end the recording. This has been so much for my notion that we'd have a tight 1 hour. But this is welcome to the Green Renaissance, right? This is a Green Renaissance meetup. Maybe Gloria would tell us how people could subscribe to getting the newsletter. I don't even know how to subscribe to get onto the list to get the memos that we're meeting. But let me just so I haven't done what John Spritzler is. I haven't taken a sign, but I am intending to do that, and to experiment and to have his experience and see what to do what he says he's done and see what I experience. But like John Olson says, I accept that people are open to liberating from plutocracy. That just as the colonial Americans accepted they would ditch their king and form a republic, then I think we're in a time where we have to ditch the plutocracy. And it's as normal a thing to do as it was to get rid of your king. Except now we have to then talk about knowing that we are confident and trusting of each other. And that's what John Spritzler gets at when he says, he presents it and the proposition, and they say, oh yeah. Okay, so now you have a point of agreement. And I would love to see a convention around the proposition, let's remove the rich from power so we can have real and not fake democracy. And so, I'm curious to know, why would you agree with that proposition? What is it that inspires you or fills you with some, place and, that you would be willing to do that? Because that's a momentous thing to declare an intention to do. So that's a whole nother piece of discussion, but that's what John Spritzler offers in his work is this idea of people coming to know that they are not alone, and that the plutocracy deploys divide and conquer. And I really accept that all these wars is a rich man's wars. And this is, so there's powerful narrative for us in this to build this movement. So you have been on a Green Renaissance series that is a collaboration of Green Liberty, Oregon Greens, Center for Truth Politics, and which is Emmanuel is the director of, and John Spritzler's People for a Democratic Revolution. We will continue this next week, and that is the end of our program for this evening. I am ending the recording. So thank you very much for watching and lasting this long.